may not look like it, but I'm not much of a camper. I've never had a good experience camping. I've done it a lot. Everybody keeps saying, if you do it, it'll be good this time, I promise. Never has it been good this time. Not once. My type of camping is like Holiday Inn or above. And I, as you know, and you know me, love having a little bit of control. Which, by the way, you can't have when you're camping. Everything else has control, which is probably why I don't like it. So because of those realities, part of my life is I also hate being lost. There's nothing about it that's exciting to me. And yet, I get lost all the time, right? And there's different types of lostness, and I lose stuff all the time. I have air tags that I lose that should be going on the things that I'm putting that I'm going to lose in a minute. There's different types of lostness, right? There's like really getting lost. And then there's knowing exactly where you are and still being lost. In the early 2000s, I was a youth pastor in Boston, and for 5 years, my youth staff and students wanted to go camping. Every year, I said, nope, let's do something fun. Then finally, two of our youth leaders came to me and they're like, Russins, Dino and Janice, they're dear friends, both doctors, so I felt safe and confident by them. Both come to me and say, listen, the senior class is big, they really want to go camping. Let's take the whole youth group camping. Dino says, my best friend is a hiking and camping instructor. He does this for a living. He's great at it. So finally, out of all forms of loss of wisdom, I say yes. And we get the kids ready to go camping, and Dino's friend, I meet with him, and he looks like a camper, right? He's got the gear, like the fancy slick pants, everything with zippers all over it. He brings these maps. This was being able to have a GPS on my phone, and so he brings maps, and he actually has a separate electronic GPS, and he's laying out maps, and he's charting the course of hiking in the White Mountains in New Hampshire in early May, which, by the way, is still cold in New Hampshire. And so he has a plan. We're going to go up to the top of this mountain. We're going to take the kids. We're going to peak the mountain. We're going to have this kind of spiritual moment on top of the mountain. Then we're going to come down and get in our cars the next day and drive home safe and wonderful. Fine, I say. And he's like, if you're still uncomfortable, my son and I will hike it the weekend before to make sure everything's fine. It's like, great, do that. So we get hiking, we get 80 high schoolers and middle schoolers, and we put 40-pound backpacks on them, also not a good idea, and we start this journey. And as we're starting, it's like a clear trail like this. Like you could just walk on the carpet, keep going, you're fine. And we walk, and then an hour or two later, it feels like we're bushwhacking more than we should be, and I get concerned. And so I lean over to Dino, and I was like, is this normal? He's like, yeah, he's got this. Another hour goes by, we start moving towards lunch, and I notice that both him and his son keep circling us from a distance. And they keep doing this circle, going around and coming back behind us, and then coming up, and he'll mention something in Dino's ear. And by this point, I'm not an idiot. And so I walk up to Dino and I say, we're lost, aren't we? And he says, no, of course not. Because he's smart. And so fast forward another hour, it's lunchtime, and now we're under these trees in this mossy bed of things that you shouldn't be hiking on anyway, and the kids are sitting down on this soft moss and having their lunch, and the hike instructor comes up to me and says, hey, so no worries, but just want you to know we're lost. And I said, those two things don't go together. Hey, no worries, and we're lost are opposite. Yes, worries, yes, lost, got it. So he's like, but no, we know what we're doing. There's certain things that we know about nature. And, moss always grows on the same side of trees. And if you can find water, water always flows in the same direction. And he starts giving me these like pearls of hiking wisdom, which, by the way, are not wisdom to swine, because I'm like, nah. This is crazy. But he's like, we got this. My son and I are going to go hike. Keep on this path and everything will be fine. And I'm like, now you're really crazy because you're my guide and you're telling me just keep walking on this path and you're going to go figure out where we're going. What if we get lost from you? Like, I've seen these movies. How am I going to tell the lead pastor that we ate his son first? It's not good, right? Fast forward, middle of this thing, we put up our tents, we get it all set, we hear water, and so we put up our tents for the nights by water, and the hike instructor says, we're gonna be great tomorrow. We have water here, we know what we're doing. And in my head, I'm like, you just have no idea what you're doing. And Dino started this conversation with our kids about what it feels like to feel lost. And when I think back to that time, this is really the first time in my adult life where I knew I was lost and it was so out of control that there was nothing I could do about it. And Dino began to share that story with the kids, and the next day we followed the water, whatever that means, and we got down and we got to our cars, and immediately the kids took off their backpacks and the water ended in this giant pool of cold New Hampshire water, and the kids took off their backpacks fully clothed and just jumped into the water out of joy. And I said to Dino, never again. The passage that was read to us this morning is a passage we're going to stay in for the next 3 weeks in Luke chapter 15. And in the setup of the passage, there's a couple important things to pay attention to. First, the tax collectors and sinners flocking to Jesus to listen and to hear and to experience all that he has to say. And then second, there's this group of grumbling religious people because he not only doesn't send these people away, but he eats with them. Now, 2 notes on that. Eating isn't just catching a quick bite at the local coffee house and then moving on. Eating in the time of Jesus is sharing table fellowship. It's a mark of camaraderie, of acceptance, of friendship. And so in eating with tax collectors and sinners, Jesus is demonstrating a deep and abiding acceptance of those that society has deemed morally bankrupt. Now, the second thing, while we're used to thinking of ourselves as sinners, that's not the way that Luke sees it. Rather, when Luke is describing these sinners that Jesus is having a meal with, he's talking about people whose pattern of sinning is so habitual, even second nature, that the whole community knows it. So like tax collectors who are intentionally ripping off their friends and their family and their neighborhood, and everybody knows it and can't do anything about it. And prostitutes who have made a life of selling parts of themselves that the whole community knows. Similarly, by righteous, Luke doesn't mean those who are either perfect or self-righteous, but rather he describes those who actually and actively are seeking to live up to the law. All of which means that Jesus is welcoming the local untouchables and ne'er-do-wells, the moral disgraces and the public outcasts, welcoming, accepting, befriending to the point of embarrassment. And the decent folks are quite understandably concerned. In that context, Jesus tells the story that Tim read to us. He tells a story not about the difference between a sinner and a righteous person, but instead, he tells 3 stories about things we lose: a sheep, a coin, and a son. And he tells of the joy we experience when we find things. Now, most of Jesus' parables have an intentional bite or kick to them. Something that just doesn't quite sit right with us or keeps us thinking and wondering and wrestling with the story until we begin to wonder, do we actually understand the story at all? It's in these stories, it's the reaction of the shepherd and the woman, which becomes a little startling, right? Jesus says, which of you, if you lost, would do this? Jesus begins the story by implying that the action that he's talking about finding the one thing that's lost, is normal, right? It's the thing that we do. But is it? In the first case, a shepherd searches for a lost sheep. Naturally enough, we think as that's the shepherd's job, yeah, go search for the sheep. But to do it, he puts the 99 other sheep at risk, leaving him in the wilderness with no protection or shelter to seek the one that was lost. And when he finds the lost sheep, he hustles the whole flock home and calls his friends and neighbor to celebrate the one stupid lost sheep. Normal? Ordinary? Not even close. Looking closer, this parable hits home in a number of unexpected ways. Specifically, what does this parable say to us about the nature and character of God? What does it say about the nature and character of us? And then what does it have to say about the nature and relationship that we have with each other? So the parable strikes at the heart of our value system, and it confronts us with the magnitude of God's infinite care, forgiveness, and love. Listen once more to these words. Suppose one of you had 100 sheep and lost one. Wouldn't you leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the lost one until you found it? This answer is no, I would not. Nobody would. Zilch, we wouldn't do this. Nada, that's not the way we think. If you have 100 sheep and lose one, oh well, too bad. I still have 99. That's the cost of doing business. Stupid sheep die. One sheep out of 100 is an acceptable loss. It's 1%. When we think about it, our whole lives are based on acceptable percentages of failure. We start every school year knowing there will be a certain dropout rate. Not everyone's going to graduate. We start marriages knowing that there's a predictable rate of divorce. Not everyone's marriage is going to make it. We're happy when the unemployment rate is less than 6%. We don't expect that everybody's going to be able to keep a job. And as far as we're concerned, losing only one sheep out of 100 is pretty good. It's like an A+. But with God, every sheep counts. How about you? Not many of us, I would assume, have had the opportunity to tend a flock of sheep. But we have been responsible for our own flocks. Whether it's coworkers or clients or customers or students or friends or children. No one but the foolish among us would leave 99% to the perils and dangers of the wilderness in order to go look for the idiot who's been stupid enough to get themselves lost. And yet, Jesus comes along, spouting what feels like foolishness, that even we who are predisposed to agree with him because we come to a church, even we begin to sympathize with the Pharisees and wonder, how could anyone be expected to live like this? So, what do? As a church, we confine these teachings to Sunday morning sermons every once in a while, and we nod to experts who dissect the historical and social context of the words, and we hear the details unraveling, and we smile, and we confine the teachings to Jesus and the lives of sheep and shepherds, knowing that we're never going to be a shepherd and this doesn't pertain to us. And we go about our business. The foolishness that Jesus advocates remains on the pages of our Bibles or in the sanctuaries of our churches or in the halls of the academy where they busy themselves with arguing on the historical minutia, and we smile at that familiarity as the text washes over us on a random Sunday morning. These are just parables after all. We can't be expected to live by them. So the foolishness that Jesus taught is reasoned into irrelevance and confined to the recesses of our consciousness. But what if? What if we didn't approach these parables with the idea of pinning down their meaning? What if we approached these parables without feeling the need to wrestle the wisdom they contain to the ground so we can create rules in which we're supposed to live by? What if instead we allow these parables to simply touch us? What might the foolishness of God prescribed in them evoke in us? How might we respond differently to their touch? In brushing up against these parables of the lost, might we feel the touch of the one to whom the parables actually point to in the first place? See, I've come to believe that only those who have known the fear, the pain, and the joy of losing and finding can really be touched by the parables of the lost. But then again, I've come to know personally the impossibility to go through life without the losing and the fear and the pain and then the joy of finding again and again and again. Jesus came teaching in parables. The parables of Jesus come to show us what the love of God is like, and they call us to a way of being in the world. The parables of the lost sheep and the lost coin and the lost son have about them a ring of foolishness. Interestingly, when Jesus tells this story to the righteous who were listening to him, he doesn't just tell one story. He tells 3 stories, all about the same thing, almost if knowing that they wouldn't get it, that they might need a second story and then maybe a third story to understand the craziness he's talking about. Only a fool would leave 99 sheep to look for the lost. Only a fool would leave 99 unguarded to wander aimlessly, to be ravaged by an unknown predator, to fall prey to God knows what. Only a fool would leave to search for the stray who might be already wounded or damaged or dying, not interested in being rescued anyway. Only a fool would risk their reputation as a wise shepherd and careful guardian of the known and seek to secure the lost sheep. Only a fool would find, would restore the lost. Jesus teaches by showing us in these parables, in such foolishness as this, God has broken into our world and does it again and again and again. The Lucan parables of the lost sheep point us in the direction of foolishness and God's passionate, loving abandon for all of God's children. The seeking shepherd who rushes off to find the one sheep shows the mystery we call God, who cares for us so much that the safety of the secure flock is risked so that the stray might be found. The mark of God's loving reign will be foolishness such as this. In love's reign, shepherds will care less about flock security and principles of good management and more about the vulnerability of the odd one out. In love's reign, everyone will be counted valuable enough to be cared for at all times. In love's reign, among the keepers of the household and fathers and sons, parents and children, there will be no unforgivable sin. There will be no unrestorable fracture. In love's reign, there will be less begrudging and more rejoicing. Joy is at the core of God's reckless love, which is why when we were writing our strategic plan here at St. Matthew, we said one of the core pieces of each of our strategies requires that we become a platform for joy, because in the presence of God, there is joy that needs to be experienced. And each week, we gather in thanksgiving of this reign of love that is God. So as we retell the parable of the lost sheep, we are called to holy foolishness. To live toward the reign of love is in some ways to heed the call of reckless love that gives itself away for the sheer joy of loving. So in the telling of the parables, we remember that none of these stories is everyday fare. None of us do this kind of relentless, reckless love abandon without the help of God. God calls us to this, and the risk must be taken. The grasp of the known must be released to reach for, to find, and to restore the lost, the abandoned, the wayward, and yes, even the self-righteous. It's the Apostle Paul who tells us God has chosen the foolish in the world to shame the wise. And God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. These parables challenge us to be reckless and relentless in our loving and in our witness. The wisdom of the world that lurks in us is challenged down to every last fiber of its being. Get this. Like the sheep, we are first found by God. And then, in reaction to God's act of love, we turn again toward our lover, and the relationship is restored, and the rejoicing begins. Yet, for some reason, the church keeps teaching, well, you got to get your junk right. You got to, as a lost sheep, get your stuff right, and then come back to the shepherd and tell him how much you got everything fixed. Grace comes first, always. Because God is the God of love doing the seeking. Hello, God. Worldly wisdom insists that repentance must come first. The worldly wise fold their arms in disgust at the foolishness that would openly welcome those who have not at least first confessed their sin. But that's not the way of God. Love, acceptance, openness, radical abandon first. In the end, this parable isn't ultimately about the sinner or the righteous, and it's actually not even about being lost or found. It's about a God so crazy in love with God's children that this God will do anything for you, for me, and for us to find us. Which of you, Jesus asks, would go to such lengths to search and find and then welcome back and celebrate? Truth be told, none of us. But God would. God does. Even now, putting all at risk to seek us out, light the lamp, search for us, scouring the countryside, looking in at all costs until we're caught up in the love and mercy and grace of God. Please pray with me. God, may we be smart enough to be foolish and to fall in your love. To rest our head on your shoulder as you pick us up and bring us home and celebrate in joy. And being found, may we be foolish enough to join you on your search party.